Break. Get ready for some important news on this channel. Time now.
Hello, welcome to Task and Purpose First Squad. I'm your host, Chris Cappy. I'm an Iraq War veteran and a very average infantryman. Today we're going to be talking about the news story that everyone's talking about, how the US might finally be leaving Afghanistan after nearly 2 decades. So right on time, guys. We did it. We won. VA Day. Sorry. So in this video, we're going to learn a little bit about the context of what's happening in Afghanistan, how troops feel about the war finally possibly ending, and we're also going to get into what that would look like. And I should say we're going to be exploring this topic because I'm not a military expert. I was a PFC when I deployed. I don't know about geopolitics, but I like to learn about it, and I think we can discover this stuff together. For instance, you guys have already been sending me great resources that the steep learning curve for getting involved in understanding these kind of things is much less steep when you have the help of other people sending you great resources, letting you know, hey, maybe you should check out different perspectives when you make these videos. So Duck Renee wrote me a great email giving me different sources to use, and you guys have been giving me different ideas of how I could do this successfully, and I really appreciate that. So we're going to start off with an article written by taskandpurpose.com by Jeff Schogel, great writer at TMP. And he says the title is Biden Sets Official End to Afghan War, September 11th, 2021. President Joe Biden has decided to withdraw most of the remaining US troops in Afghanistan before the 20th anniversary of the terrorist attacks that began the war on terrorism, a senior administrative official said Tuesday. The withdrawal will begin before May 1st, the original deadline set by former President Donald Trump for all US troops to leave Afghanistan under an agreement with the Taliban. And it could be completed well before September, said the official, who spoke on a condition of anonymity. According to the official, the end of the US military's presence in Afghanistan will no longer be tied to conditions on the ground because Biden determined the conditions-based approach of the past 2 decades would only ensure the troops remain in the country indefinitely. What we've seen in the past when President Obama would talk about, we will leave once conditions on the ground are met, when President Bush would say the same thing, it led to a situation where we could justify staying in the country forever, because what conditions need to be met, and that also puts the ball in the Taliban's court because they could make sure that those conditions aren't met right before it looks like the US is going to leave, basically setting a timetable for withdrawal. There's a lot of things up in the air with that could go wrong. So if this is true, then this would be, I think, a great sign for the US to finally end the war in Afghanistan and come home. The US government has let the Taliban know the US and partner nations will forcefully respond to any attacks on their forces as they leave Afghanistan, said the official, who added that at the end of the withdrawal, the only remaining US troops will be the assigned to protecting American diplomats in Afghanistan. Biden's decision comes as the Taliban have the initiative in their war against the Afghan government. Afghan security forces are in retreat and they are not expected to hold together long after the US military's exit. When I was in Iraq, we had our police and Iraqi army counterparts. And often I would think about what's going to happen to these people once we leave. And do we have some kind of a responsibility to help them out and to make sure that things don't fall apart after we leave? It becomes a sticky situation there, because a lot of these people have put their faith and trust in, hey, we'll work with the US military in Iraq and Afghanistan because they have our backs. So are we really going to have Afghanistan's back after this ends? Once we pull out, what's going to happen to all those Afghan army soldiers? Are they going to be in more danger? And this comes into a topic that I had an article pulled up before, but basically, so the Soviet Union, when they invaded Afghanistan, they lost about 14,000 soldiers during 10 years of combat. The US military has lost, between NATO and the US Army, about 3,000 soldiers have passed away in Afghanistan from combat. And a lot less NATO forces have been killed in Afghanistan than the Soviet Union lost. Why is that? It seems to be that a lot of the casualties are being taken by the Afghan army. Afghanistan doesn't release their casualty details, but it looks like there could be something like 5,000 Afghan troops dying, being KIA, each year. So the death toll in Afghanistan could actually be way greater than what the Russians lost in the 80s. And so my point with all this is just that the toll of the war there is greater than we might think. And I myself am torn on what the right decision is, because I remember when I got home from Iraq, and then when the US left, very shortly after that, the place where I was stationed at just a little bit east of Camp Taji, just north of Baghdad, in a town called Mushata fell to ISIS. So essentially everything that we had built and worked on and all the security that we had tried to maintain there during that year was a little bit all in vain. So what people are saying is the same thing might happen here in Afghanistan, where once the US forces leave, those people are going to be steamrolled. All these videos are kind of connected that I'm making, and we see themes keep coming up over and over again. One of those themes is that the United States is in a transition period. At least the United States military is transitioning to near-peer conflicts. What is near-peer? Glad you asked. Near-peer is the Pentagon speak for talking about countries that have military powers that are near to us. So they're like our peers. They're peer pressuring us, is what I like to say. But when you look at some of the reasons why we might be in Afghanistan currently, it kind of has to do with these near peers, like China and the situations happening in Pakistan and Iran, because Afghanistan is actually a very strategic position on the globe. It's surrounded by a lot of countries that NATO would like to have some influence over. It's only in a country, so from this article from NATO.int, as a landlocked country, neighboring China, Pakistan, Iran, and Central Asian countries, Afghanistan has significant geostrategic and geopolitical importance. It is the only country in the region that gives open access to United States and NATO allies. The Khyber Pass, located between Afghanistan and Pakistan, has long been one of the most important trade routes and strategic military locations in the world. And it looks like there's a great incentive for the United States to want to stay in Afghanistan and want to justify staying there if they want this strategically important place. I mean, why did the Soviet Union invade? It's because Afghanistan is a go-between between a lot of powerful places. Continuing on here, moreover, the Silk Road passes through Afghanistan. The ancient network of trade routes, 4,000 miles long, is known as the cultural crossroads of the Indian, Persian, and Chinese civilizations. Insecurity and instability in Afghanistan would destabilize the region and provide fertile ground for terrorist groups. The United States has long said that they want to stay in Afghanistan to prevent it from falling to terrorists and us seeing another 9/11 happening. My 2 cents, I don't think another 9/11 could ever happen again. I don't think that we're worried about the terrorists coming back to the United States to attack us. I think the United States is worried that once we leave, there'll be a lot of instability in Afghanistan, and that would cause economic problems. Afghanistan also faces immense economic and development challenges. The country is rich in natural resources, gas, minerals, and oil, worth more than $1 trillion according to some estimates. So if you're looking for an answer as to why the United States hasn't been able to find a way to pull out, that might be the answer. So this withdrawal is supposed to happen before the anniversary of the 2 decades in Afghanistan. Insert jokes about how the war in Afghanistan is old enough to do X, Y, or Z. It's old enough to vote. It's old enough to go to war. The war in Afghanistan is old enough that I could hook up with it. We get it, the war in Afghanistan is now an adult. It's old. From Jeff Schogel's article, Senator Jim Inhofe, the former chairman of the Senate Arms Committee Service, called Biden's decision to withdraw U.S. troops from Afghanistan reckless and dangerous, arguing that the end of military presence in the country must be based on conditions on the ground. That's the one side of the argument. I understand both sides of the argument. I see where people are coming from. There's some people that say, hey, we've been in Germany and Japan since the end of World War II, and that leaving completely isn't really a realistic option. So I'd like to take a minute to look at the conflict map from Afghanistan. This is one of those resources that you guys sent me with the live updates of the region. You can see this was posted a day ago. Right now, we're in a period of time in Afghanistan where things are not going in the United States' favor. there in terms of the violence. So you can see the mosque was damaged by government airstrikes in the area. There's more news from the area about how a police chief was killed last night in northern Afghanistan. Anyone who takes the risk of working with the American government, they often face the consequences. I remember in Iraq, we had a couple of police, and often they would wear masks because they didn't want their identity to be known so that their family wouldn't be attacked and they wouldn't be attacked. So people in Afghanistan right now, the soldiers on the ground, the Afghani army, they're worried about what would happen if the United States leaves the country. And so you're seeing police chiefs are being murdered by the Taliban already in northern Afghanistan. This is, I think, a large untold story of the war in Afghanistan and Iraq, is the consequences of how many soldiers, we propped up these armies, we trained these forces, we put them together, we equipped them. When you do that, you're a little bit, in some sense, responsible for what happens to them. And we've been trying to train these soldiers for 2 decades now, and they're taking the brunt of the attacks. The Taliban most often is going to be killing and targeting the Afghanistan pro-government forces. That's what happened in Iraq too. And that's one of the things that Russia didn't get right, from my understanding. If I'm wrong, let me know in the comments. But Russia didn't take advantage of the fact that they could prop up local forces, build up local armies to do the fighting for them. To talk about that Soviet connection more, here's the NewYorker.com. Early in 2010, Mikhail Gorbachev, the last leader of the Soviet Union, offered advice to President Barack Obama about the Afghan war. After the Soviets have invaded Afghanistan in 1979 and found themselves marred in an unwinnable conflict against Islamists, Mujahideen rebels aided by the United States and others, Gorbachev overruled Hawks and ordered a military retreat, which was completed in 1989. Obama authorized secret peace talks with the Taliban later that year. Ever since, the United States has essentially followed Gorbachev's approach, albeit slowly, through policies laced with contradictions and a very high cost in expenditures and lives, more than 2,200 American troops. Here's the way I look at it. Either the United States is in Afghanistan because they really super care about the Afghans' infrastructure and they really want them to do well, or the United States is probably staying in Afghanistan because they see it as very worth it to keep that region from devolving into chaos, because there could be some huge consequences, and those economic pathways that we talked about before were cut off, then that would have real world ramifications for a lot of people around the world, and especially an economy that's not doing great right now. Let's take a look at the CFR.globe, which keeps track of casualties. So you can see that just since 2010, over 100,000 civilians have died in Afghanistan, and over 18.8 billion has been spent in foreign aid dispersal around the country. After the Taliban government, basically what this is saying is that the reason the United States even went into Afghanistan in the first place was because they refused to hand over Osama bin Laden after the September 11th attacks. So we went in, invaded, Taliban lost control of the country. They relocated to the south where Kandahar and Helmand province are, and they wage an insurgency. The United States gets bogged down in this insurgency. I think they see how much better things can go if they have security in Afghanistan. I think it's hard for the United States at that point to then let go of the control that they have in Afghanistan. So after the initial success of defeating the Taliban in the early years of the Afghan war, what happens is the next 18 years is kind of an up and down of violence where the Taliban will get a stronger foothold and then they'll get destroyed and come back a few years later. Right now we're in a period where only 53% of Afghan districts are under government control or influence. It says here, the United States has vital interest in preserving the many political, economic, and security gains that they've achieved in Afghanistan since 2001. But what I don't like is they don't tell us why. Why does the United States have vital interest? And that's a little bit what I was talking about, that other article that I was looking at, which is that the United States strategic interest there is actually specifically about keeping things stable so that the economy can keep running, so that goods and services can keep running through Afghanistan, and so that they can have military influence near Pakistan and near China. Because if the United States doesn't take control of somewhere, then they feel like, okay, China will take control then if we don't. BBC has a great rundown what's happening here. They say, Couple of quotes from President Biden. "We cannot continue this cycle of extending or expanding our military presence in Afghanistan, hoping to create the ideal conditions for our withdrawal, expecting a different result. While we will not stay involved in Afghanistan militarily, our diplomatic and humanitarian work will continue. We went to Afghanistan because of a horrific attack that happened 20 years ago that cannot explain why we should remain there in 2021. It's possible we went there in 2001 for one reason, and then that reason changed over the years as we realized there was more lucrative incentives to stay there." Where they said an Afghan government peace negotiator in Doi, in an interview with the DPA news agency, described the move as the most irresponsible, selfish thing the United States could do to its Afghan partners. The Afghan negotiator, who spoke on condition of anonymity, said it might be at the end of the war for Washington, but the Afghan partners would pay the price. "A full withdrawal from Afghanistan is dumber than dirt and devilishly dangerous," said Republican Senator Lindsey Graham, according to the Associated Press. President Biden will, in essence, cancel an insurance policy against another 9/11. I said before, I don't think there would ever be another real huge terrorist attack in the United States. I think there's probably other reasons to stay there. Here's another great line that I think is a part of this conversation. They say here at the CSIS, "It is true that problems lie ahead, but what is almost never discussed are the many gains that have been achieved since the turn of the century. During Taliban rule, girls were prohibited from attending school. Today, there are roughly 4 million girls in school in Afghanistan. Moreover, millions of cell phones have empowered people by connecting them to the world. GDP per capita has increased by over threefold, and the government's capacity to collect tax revenue for its own security and development has improved significantly from almost nothing in 2002. As the Afghans stand by, we can responsibly stand down. A precipitous withdrawal of our security forces, our financial support for the Afghan army, and our foreign aid would be a moral disaster and strategic setback for the United States. The United States should be seeking a strong Finnish strategy that keeps the faith to our commitments through 2024. We can negotiate gradual, sensible burden shift towards the Afghans if we stay the course." Getting into again that Afghanistan is about way more than just terrorism. From this article at CIC, these countries need stability in Afghanistan and the areas around it for infrastructure to connect their economies to global markets. This need is particularly acute for China, which cannot maintain its historic levels of economic growth without opening up its central and western regions to international investment and trade. As what everyone, including the United States, thought would be a time-limited counterterrorism invention in Afghanistan has morphed into a permanent outpost. Neighboring states view the US presence in Afghanistan as geostrategic. In their view, the United States could use its bases and other military assets in Afghanistan against them under the banner of counterterrorism. So we begin to see why the United States has been so interested in staying in this country and what could possibly be bad about the United States for the United States leaving Afghanistan. The United States said support for terrorism was one of the rationales for the overthrowing of Saddam. It could easily do so again to justify intervention in Iran, classified by the US State Department. I guess what I'm trying to say is the US could be spending, let's say, $500 million on the war in Afghanistan each year. However, if by spending that $500 million, they're able to ensure $3 billion worth of additional goods and they're able to make money in other ways off of that security investment, then it makes sense to do that. This article from RT, written by Scott Ritter, a former US Marine Corps intelligence officer, really captures the other side of what a lot of people feel. Here's the title: US to withdraw from Afghanistan after 2 decades of war, leaving behind a tortured wasteland and having accomplished nothing. I would say there's a good percentage of Afghanistan veterans who feel that way. The US decision to leave Afghanistan without any conditions represents a political victory for those in the US government who sought an end to the nearly 2-decade conflict in that nation. President Joe Biden, in a departure from a policy embraced by 4 successive US presidents, placed stringent conditions on determining the condition under which the US might leave Afghanistan. Biden has made the rejection of the so-called forever war in Afghanistan an integral part of his national security strategy. Do we call us staying in Japan or Germany a forever war? No, I guess we don't call it that because people aren't still shooting at us in those places. to be fair. 20-year conflict in Afghanistan accomplished nothing more than killing more than 2,000 Americans, wasting trillions of dollars of American treasure, and slaughtering hundreds of thousands of Afghans while leaving their country little more than a tortured wasteland. There's also some concerns from our NATO allies about how we're going to get all of the equipment out of there in time, because we have tons of tanks and resources that are essentially just going to be left on the ground there, possibly for the Taliban to take those assets. There's not that much time to get all of the troops that are currently there out of there by September 11th of this year. Thank you guys for watching, and thanks for writing all those emails to me, sending me different resources. If I get something wrong, please comment below and we'll talk about it. And please remember to subscribe. I'm still developing this format and figuring out where it's going to go from here. So any comments and feedback you give me is much appreciated. I've already been incorporating a ton of what you guys have been saying into the videos. I'm having fun doing it. I hope you guys like watching it.